Hi everyone, John Heath here again for Milton Rose Learning with another Let's Learn video. So it is a tale of two star-crossed lovers today. So it's Romeo and Juliet context. So all the history and all the social stuff that you're going to need to know to get those high grades. So we're going to look at some of the key contextual factors underpinning the play. Then we'll look at how that context kind of really affects the play, so the kind of context in action. And then I've highlighted three of the key contextual quotes, which would be good for any essay pretty much. So we'll unpick those together as well. So, okay then, so let's dive in. So first off then, in terms of the key context that you really need to know, we'll go with first Elizabethan society. Now, in terms of key features then, family honour and feuds were really important in this period. So loyalty to one's family name was absolutely sacred. Okay, more important than probably in modern day society. So the Montague-Capulet feud, which is at the core of the narrative, reflects the importance that was placed on honour in this period. Okay, even at the cost of peace. So families would go to war, and sometimes blood feuds would go on over generations, and they'd go on so long sometimes that the families even forgot why they were fighting in the first place. So these feuds are extremely important, and obviously they're at the narrative core of Romeo and Juliet. It's very important to understand that. Second part of Elizabethan society is what I've kind of called patriarchal authority. So as we know, patriarchy means male-dominated society. It's a really good word for your essays. And in this period then, because of patriarchy, fathers controlled their daughters' futures, including over who they married. Okay, the notion of marrying for love is a very modern idea. Back in the day, it was not like that due to patriarchy, and women would have to marry who their father kind of wished. So therefore, in light of patriarchal authority, Juliet defying her father's will and saying, no, I want to marry somebody else, would have shocked an Elizabethan audience, because it's subverting or undercutting patriarchy absolutely massively. Okay, so then moving on, we've got social attitudes in this period. So in Elizabethan England, 1590s and a little bit beyond, we lived under Queen Elizabeth I, hence the image, and family honour was important, as we learnt, but also obedience and the social order were vital. Okay, the kind of great chain of being, the idea that society was structured by God and everybody had to obey that structure, and your parents were above you in that structure, and so you needed to follow what they were kind of telling you to do. Also, the attitudes to love and marriage. So love was idealized. We had this notion of courtly romance, which you might want to research, where love was kind of pure and idealized, but often it kind of clashed almost slightly, because marriage was often arranged. Marriage was a political issue in this era, whereas in the modern era now, marriage is not normally political. You can kind of marry, there's a lot more choice involved. So Romeo and Juliet's secret romance defied the Elizabethan expectations, and because of that, we know that tragic consequences are going to flow from that, because they're not playing the game socially and they're not kind of going along with Elizabethan conventions. Okay, and then how does that play out then with Shakespeare, with the big man's kind of views on this? So we call this authorial intention. What is the author's kind of intention? What are their true views? So let's try and tease some of those out. So first off, I would think it's a critique of family honour and feuds in this play. Nothing good comes from these feuds apart from blood and death and tragedy. So I think Shakespeare is showing there how blind loyalty to family pride leads to violence and tragedy, and that's what I teach in class and to my tutees. He's very much critiquing the feuds, and we can see that because look at all the horrible stuff that comes from the feuds. That seems to be Shakespeare kind of wagging his finger at us and kind of telling us we need to move on from this and be a bit more civilized politically. The second Shakespearean view, I think, is I think he's challenging Elizabethan patriarchy. I don't think he likes it that much. So Juliet's resistance to her father's authority questions traditional gender roles in this period. Women should have a bit more freedom, I think he's kind of saying, and also parental power. They're not, or they shouldn't be seen as these godlike figures. I think that's part of Shakespeare's authorial intention as well. So he's very revolutionary in that sense. He's undercutting and kind of subverting traditional Elizabethan kind of social norms. That's really important to get your head around, because he was miles ahead of his time in that regard. Okay. So now then, let's have a look at how this context plays out. So in terms of context then, let's look at how it kind of, the context in action in the play. So first off, it has a big effect in youth versus authority. So Romeo and Juliet's secret love, because it is very furtive and secretive, defies the family's authority, as we know, and it highlights then in Elizabethan society the tension between individual desires. Romeo and Juliet, they love each other and they want to be together. Those are their individual desires. But the clash between those and the societal expectations, which is basically, no, you will marry who I say you are to marry. So there's a really big tension there, a social tension that plays out throughout the play, because they're not playing by the rules. And that's a real kind of problem, and that will lead to tragedy. Okay. Then the second kind of context in action is patriarchy and gender roles. So Juliet's defiance of her father, as we know, shows the limited agency, that's a great word for your essay, agency or freedom of women in Elizabethan society. They're kind of constrained. They can't move as much as they want to. They don't have the freedoms that women have in the modern era. So obedience is expected. And that creates like narrative friction with her and her father, obviously. Also other characters like Paris and who Juliet's father wants her to marry. And the patriarchy and gender roles are being almost not subverted, but they're being kind of they're being challenged, shall we say, and they're challenged massively by Juliet and Romeo to a degree. Also, the context in action is really clear with family honour and feuds. So the Montague-Capulet feud emphasises the importance of family loyalty in this period. I can't overstate that. They were really into family and dynasties in this era. And it was even to the point of the family is everything. It's more important than personal happiness. Okay, you don't care about yourself, you care about the family. Okay, the Montagues or the Capulets. And that, if you put yourself before the family, then that leads to tragedy in this period, as it does. Okay, because Romeo and Juliet put themselves first, they don't put their families first, and that leads to tragedy because, as we know, it kind of clashes with the Elizabethan social expectations. Okay, now let's finally look at some of the key contextual quotes, and these would be really good for your essays and for exams. So the first piece of context is political violence. Now there's a great quote from the chorus in the prologue which says, "From ancient grudge break to new mutiny." Okay, and we can see the kind of the grudges and the mutinies in that image there. There's kind of political fights. So that quote really encapsulates the long-standing feud that fuels the violence in the city of Verona in northern Italy, where the play is set, that plays into Elizabethan stereotypes of Italy being a place of passion and violence. Now, in this period, I'm sure you probably know, but the Elizabethan audience in England, we were Protestant, and the Italians were Roman Catholic, and Catholics and Protestants had fell out. They didn't really get on with each other. So in Shakespeare's London, where the play was normally put on, we saw the Italians as kind of overly passionate, and these kind of the Catholics who had lost their mind almost. And this quote kind of plays into those Italian Catholic stereotypes, and the English Protestant audience will be nodding their head going, yeah, they need to calm down, and they're a little bit over passionate, shall we say. Then we have a really good quote, a really famous one, on the inevitability of fate. So let's have a little look at that. So a pair of star-crossed lovers. Okay, again from the chorus, quite early on in the play. So the star-crossed lovers are obviously Romeo and Juliet, as we can see in the image there. And that quote beautifully emphasises the notion of fate and the inevitability of Romeo and Juliet's tragic end. They're definitely going to kind of probably die in a tragedy. So it's kind of a really good example of foreshadowing in the play. And it plays into the Elizabethan Christian notions of divine fate and retribution. The Elizabethans, as we know, were heavy Christians. They really believed in Christian theology, and they believed that if you don't stick to the great chain of being and to kind of Elizabethan social norms, then God will come down from on high and you will suffer retribution, either death or injury or something. So that quote really symbolises the Elizabethan way of looking at the world from a Christian perspective, and if you don't play the game, then God will smite you, and that unfortunately is what happens. That's a really good contextual quote again. Then finally, a really good quote on patriarchal authority. As you can see from the image, Lord Capulet there, kind of laying the law down. And he says, this is a Lord Capulet quote, "Hang thee, young baggage, disobedient wretch." And he's talking to Juliet there. So in that quote, he kind of dehumanises her, calling her baggage, almost like not human there, and disobedient, because she doesn't want to marry his suitor, which is Paris. She says, "No, I don't want that. Wants to marry somebody else." And Lord Capulet goes kind of mad because she's going against patriarchal authority. So Lord Capulet in that quote then is showing patriarchal authority, as we said, and Juliet's lack of freedom or lack of agency, great word, in a deeply patriarchal era. She's trying to stand up for female rights and she can't, and she's kind of being kind of dehumanized and denigrated by her own father there. So a very kind of verbally quite violent quote there, and I think but a really, really good one if you're analysing patriarchy in any essay. Okay then. Right, if we just zoom out for a second, then let's have a nice little summary. So hopefully that's been really useful for you. We've had a look at some of the key contextual factors, okay, so teasing apart some of the key parts of Elizabethan society, such as feuds and patriarchal authority, a little bit of Shakespeare's authorial intentions we've teased out as well. Then we've looked at how the context played out in action, so the tension between Romeo and Juliet wanting to put themselves first and love, and then being crushed almost by Elizabethan social expectations. Also a little bit on gender roles as well and how Juliet is trying to subvert those. And then we've just finished by teasing out some of the key contextual quotes. All three of those are really good for your essays. Those would be really good to reflect on and to analyse in a little bit more detail. So it just remains to say, if you found this video useful, which hopefully you have, don't forget to hit the like, subscribe and tap the bell icon, because we're really looking to grow the channel now and grow it into a really great learning resource for everyone. We'll obviously be back with more Romeo and Juliet videos in the next few kind of days and weeks. And it just remains to say, obviously, thanks for listening and take care.